Hey everyone, welcome to week 11. I'll take a look at those profile stories, and just like before, give me 2 weeks to get them graded, though most of the time I get it done in a week. So, within the next week, hopefully you'll get your profile stories. Take a look at the edits I gave you, take a look at any suggestions, and of course, really understand the feedback, learn from it, because for your final story, which we'll go over, you'll have a choice of either doing a hard news story or a profile story. And then, of course, part of what I'm going to be looking at for that is, did you take the feedback that I've been giving you throughout your last assignment and applying it? The feedback that I give you in these assignments is really custom tailored to you because everybody struggles with different things. So those are the things that I've noticed that you probably are struggling with, and that's what you can really work on, especially in these last few weeks, to get better at. So for your final assignment, you'll be able to improve on wherever you are at right now. So let's take a look at what we're doing for this week. So we've got week 11 here. We're doing it a little different than some of the previous weeks. There's not a good chapter in the book for op-eds, which I'm about to go over. So I have an assignment. I'm sorry, I have a reading for you to do on your own for op-eds. And that's in lieu of your actual chapter, but there is no quiz, so that's the nice thing. There won't be any quiz attached to this. However, you do have still some reading to do this week. So we're going to be going over op-eds, and of course, you already saw this in the outline. To make sure you're watching this video first, because what I'm going to do is, with this reading that I'm going to give you, I want to go over right now in the video like key pieces to pay attention to. Make sure I can clear that up here first in the video, and then of course you can go read it, and that will then I think reinforce everything that I'm giving you right now in this video. You're going to have an op-ed assignment that I'm giving out this week. That's like your other writing assignment, so it's worth 100 points. And you're going to be reading a few op-eds during the week in editorials. I'm going to tell you what the difference is. But, you're supposed to be reading news every day. This week, I'd like you to read a few op-eds throughout the week. Find some op-eds in the New York Times or Washington Post or the Hartford Courant or wherever your local paper is, and read that section to start getting an idea, a flavor of what op-eds are. Your final assignment, I'm not giving you, so you have this op-ed assignment, right? That's writing assignment number 3. So that's the last of the big 3 writing assignments. And then in a couple weeks, I'm going to give you your final assignment, which is a writing assignment, but it's just a much more comprehensive one. Like I was saying before, either of a hard news or a profile or a feature story. So that's down the pipeline. But that's really it as far as big writing assignments. Just so you guys have an idea kind of what's left here. We've got this op-ed assignment, the final assignment. You'll have one more writing exercise and one more quiz, and that's it. So the last few weeks of the semester are really built, it's leading up to getting that final assignment. It's going to be a lot of work, so it's giving you that time to be able to do that final assignment. But mostly right now, you guys have the core of the grading already in after I grade this profile story and then this op-ed. Okay, so let's take a look and actually get into what an op-ed is. And I'm going to open up this article here, How to Write an Op-Ed. So an op-ed, I'll just give you a brief little history. An op-ed started, what it stood for was opposite editorial. And what that meant is when papers weren't online, right? So 15, 20 years ago when all newspapers were print publications, you actually got the newspaper delivered. There's a section in the newspaper called an editorial. And what an editorial is it's the stance of the newspaper. So, for example, a lot of us, if you kind of aware of this, think of like the New York Times being liberal, you'll hear. The New York Times is liberal, and then you'll hear the Wall Street Journal is conservative. Well, you have to be careful of that, because it doesn't mean that the reporting is liberal and conservative. The reporting for both of those are straight facts, like you guys have been learning in this class. There's straight facts, they're not taking a side, they're being very objective. However, there's a different branch within the newspaper that's the editorial section. And those of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times do get to take a stance. So for the New York Times, they are more liberal. So when they look at issues, they'll look at issues in a more, progressive way, whereas as opposed to the Wall Street Journal, look at a more conservative way. And what those separate branches do is they write opinion pieces for the newspaper. They write editorials. So I'm going to give an example. Let's say, I don't know if hopefully you obviously haven't paid attention to the news, that's part of this class, but the tariffs that President Trump, is instituting right here. So the Wall Street Journal's editorial board, that certain section in the Wall Street Journal that focuses on the opinion side of the newspaper, will look at tariffs and they'll say, we think it's a good thing what President Trump is doing. And they'll write articles saying that, we think it's a good thing and here's why. And what we're about to learn is, they're backing up with research, they're backing up with facts, but they're coming in with a perspective. And it's clearly labeled on the article that it's the editorial board. So whenever you see editorial, an editorial, and you're reading it as a news article, know that means they're coming at it with a perspective. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying it's an opinion. They're coming at it with an opinion. The hard news section of the paper doesn't come in it with an opinion. So that's the difference. So going back to the tariffs, the Wall Street Journal, which is conservative, will usually write something saying, yes, we think it's a good thing. The New York Times editorial board, which is liberal, might look at that and say, we don't think it's a good thing. Our opinion is that we think it's a bad thing. And they'll come up with their research and facts that show why they think it. And it's just an opinion, right? And so that's that's what an editorial is. And just also, I'm going to swing this back to op-eds in a second, but just so we're also clear, the editorial section of the newspaper and the reporters of the newspaper don't work together. They don't sit next to each other. They don't talk to each other really. They're separate entities within the publication. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand in news, is that when the New York Times comes up with this editorial, those group of writers have nothing to do with their news reporters, and they keep them separate, just as like they keep their advertising separate and their PR section separate, right? They're all like different functions within that organization. So it is important to understand that there's that distinction. Swinging back to op-eds. So originally what op-ed stood for was opposite editorial. So going back to my example, let's say the Wall Street Journal in a print publication wrote that the tariffs are a good thing for the country, and somebody else, anybody, like just a regular person, you, me, somebody else disagrees. You could write into the newspaper, write your stance of why you disagree with that editorial, why you disagree with that opinion, and the Wall Street Journal would pick a few and put it on the opposite page of their editorial. So page 1 was saying, we think the tariffs, this newspaper thinks that tariffs aren't a good idea, tariffs are a good idea. And on the next page, excuse me, which was the op-ed page, would be regular readers' perspectives saying why we disagree with the opinion of the newspaper. That's how it originally started. As time went on now, the term has really kind of evolved into opinion editorial. And so what opinion editorials, op-eds, what they are now is you just have an opinion on anything, and the newspaper will pick a few. They don't take them all, but you can submit an op-ed, and the newspaper takes a few and will submit it in their opinion section of their newspaper, whether that's print or whether that's online. They'll actually have a section that's for opinions. Op-ed, right? Opinion editorial is now kind of what the term is. But that's a little bit of the history for it. So, as a quick recap, there is a difference when you hear the term editorial and op-ed. And here's what you have to remember. Editorial means it's the perspective of the newspaper. There's usually a few writers that are together within the newspaper that represent the newspaper. They all kind of have like-minded points of view. And they'll write articles that are the opinions of the newspaper, editorials. And it's clearly labeled editorial in the editorial section. You know that that's not hard news reporting. That's editorial. That's the opinion. So that's editorial. Op-eds come from anybody. That can come from you. It could come from me. It could come from CEOs. It could come from, I'm trying to think, nurses. It could come from, I don't know, someone 18, someone over 65. Doesn't matter. I'm just throwing out anything. Op-eds just come from the regular people, and the newspaper will pick a few to publish. That's the difference between an op-ed and an editorial. Both are opinions. It's just one's coming from the newspaper, one's coming from everybody else. So, you're going to read this article on how to write an op-ed because there is kind of like a structure, a formula. I'm going to go over some key points right now just so I can make sure I articulate it to you as well. But that's not an excuse then not to read it either. You have to go through this after I go through this video and reread it because it is going to take a little bit for you to get the hang of. But let's take a look at some of these sections here so I can break down with some of the parts that might be confusing. Distinguishing characteristics of an op-ed or a column. So It's typically short, between 700 and 800 words. They're not 3,000 word essays, right? I mean, it depends. The New York Times may be a little longer, like 1,000, 1,500 words, but most of them are going to be between 750 and 800 words. That's kind of the range that you're going to see. They have a clearly defined point and a clearly defined point of view. Now, this one seems trickier, though, and is Professor Chiar, isn't that the same thing? No, there's a little bit of a distinction, so let me explain it. A clearly defined point, which means you have to have a reason, a theme of that opinion paper. And let me give you an example. Let's just say you're talking about I don't know, sports. No, I want to do something different with sports. Let's say you're talking about the environment. Let's stick with the environment right now. So to clearly defined point. So if you don't have a clearly defined point, maybe you're just mentioning everything with the environment. So you start talking about how the environment is changing and we pollute, but we don't really know exactly which pollutions are bad. Then we go into like solar panels. I'm just trying to throw out everything. Then we go into solar panels. Then we start talking about the ocean, and then we talk about China, what their pollution's like compared to the U.S. I'm just throwing a bunch of things out. Hopefully what you're starting to see is I'm just kind of like broadly talking about everything. I don't really exactly have a point to the paper. It's like, yeah, it's roughly about environment, but I've mentioned like anything that could be under the environmental theme umbrella. It's way too much. Having a clearly defined point is like honing in on an aspect. So maybe I'm talking about the environment in oceans, right? And that our oceans are getting polluted. And, I just focus on that. Or maybe I talk about air quality. Or maybe I talk about renewable energies, talking about how the environment could use renewable energies. And I'm just focusing on renewable energies. Or maybe one or two aspects. But the point is there's a clearly more defined point of it. Reading through, I can see a theme being intertwined throughout. I can understand really what this piece is about. And it's not just about all your like random thoughts. In other words, going into tangents. Sometimes when we do these opinions, people just want to go into tangents and they just almost stream of conscious. Anything they can think of, they just start throwing in there. You have to really hone it in on and say, what exactly am I trying to get across here? What is the point of this? So that's what a clearly defined point is. Point of view is taking a stance on it. So let's go back to my environment. Man, I don't know if you can hear it. My dogs are going crazy, so I apologize if that's distracting because it's distracting me. But all right, clearly defined point of view. So the point of view is going back to the environment. Let's say we say pollution. Yeah, we're talking about pollution in the environment. Well, it's not enough just to talk about just facts about pollution, how pollution's increased and we have the highest carbon now and whatever, air quality is bad in these countries and we just talk about that. You also have to take a point of view. So you have to say now, like, what can we do about it? Or maybe we don't do anything about it. Maybe, we'll take climate change. It's not just enough to say that the environment is changing. You have to now take a stance. Do you think it's man-made, or do you disagree with science and what others have said? Do you think that maybe you agree that it's man-made, but you have a different view on how to tackle it? So some people have one view of the way that we address climate change. Others have a different view. That's the point of view. All right. So just to recap, because again, I know this is confusing. Clearly defined point. Let's take climate change. I like this. Clearly defined point of view is you say there is climate change happening. And here is the reason why I believe there's climate change happening. And you give me all the facts that show me that climate change is happening. It's not enough just to write that as your op-ed. You have to have a point of view now. So, okay, we've established climate change is happening. And now your point of view is maybe what do we do about it? So you have a certain way that you think we need to address it, because others might have other opinions on how to address it. You have this opinion on how to address it. Or maybe your point of view is, I believe that it's cyclical. As a side note, you're going against 99.9% of scientists, but still, if that is your point of view, then you're clearly defining what your point of view is, right? And you're explaining that you believe that it's cyclical, and here's why. So one is having a point, and one is having a point of view. When you read this, hopefully it will make a little bit more sense too, but I think that maybe gives you a better idea when you read the two of those. All right, represents clarity of thinking. I know it's a very broad thing, but it usually means that there's structure to it, that things connect, that you're just not all over the place. Because anybody can just sit down and start ranting and write any thought that comes to their head. That's not really a good op-ed. It's not a good opinion piece. You have to kind of have like a flow to it. It has to tell a story. It has to make sense. has to connect. You can't like contradict yourself. Have to use a little bit of critical thinking in there, explain like reasoning. That's what we kind of mean all by clarity of thinking. It's not just your thoughts, just your opinions. It's your opinions also then kind of backing it up and showing it in like a cogent argument. And here's the last one. It contains a strong, distinctive voice of the writer. So, when we're talking about voice, this is where it's very different from your hard news reporting. So, when you're doing your hard news and your profile story, you're being very you're the third person. You're objective. In fact, I've said, right, you're not the narrator of these, or I'm sorry, you're not the main character. You're the narrator when you're doing hard news pieces and those other kind of journalistic work. So you're just trying to lay out the facts. So there really shouldn't actually be a voice in there, because whether I write it or you write it or Joe Schmo writes it, it should all kind of sound similar because it has that same kind of structure in a news story. Op-eds are more like essays, and you're allowed to write in first person. I know this is going to confuse people, but op-eds you can write in first person because it's an opinion piece or an editorial even for the newspaper. It could be written in like the first person as far as they say this newspaper, but it's written in first person, right? So that means you can have a distinctive voice. So distinctive voice can be like maybe you're writing it in a little. Some people try to pull off humor in their op-eds. They maybe write a little sarcastically. That's okay. That's a distinctive voice. Maybe it's urgency. Right? So it's like, we need to act now, and everything in the writing makes you feel like this is the most important thing, it has to act now. Maybe it's doom and gloom, like this is depressing, and you just write it out and how depressing it is. Maybe it's a hopeful voice. Maybe everything is just very hopeful and encouraging how we can fix a problem. There's different ways that you can write it in your voice. So I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way. It kind of depends on the piece and how you are as a writer. But you should see some kind of voice in there. I should kind of get like a little bit of your personality. Unlike all the other kind of news stories that we write, op-eds, you can show your personality a little bit more. All right. So here are some just basic questions that you're asking yourself when you're writing the op-ed. Like, do I have a clear point to make, and so what is it? So at the end, you should be able to, in like one sentence, think of it almost like a lead, but in one sentence, you should be able to say, what is my point? Like, what is the point to this? What do I want to get somebody to get out of it on the other end? Who cares? And this is an important one. You have to be thinking about who you're talking about and like, why would they care about this? So for example, let's say for an op-ed, you start talking about, I don't know, trying to think of a good example. Motorcycles and wearing helmets, and you should wear helmets with a motorcycle. Well, most people don't drive a motorcycle, right? So maybe most people don't care. So maybe your whole point of it is you have to kind of explain why this growing deaths, affect so many others, and that could be maybe even dangerous for the road for you as a driver, or I don't know. I picked a topic I really don't know much about, but the point is, even if you do something kind of obscure, you have to be kind of connecting it. Like, okay, well, why should we care about this issue as a society? Why should we care about this? You also have to be thinking about who you're trying to convince. So, and then of course, is there a substance to my argument? You have to make sure that your argument has some kind of legs to stand on, and that really goes to the research part, which we'll talk about. But it can't just be you ranting an opinion. You have to back it up. You have to be able to kind of almost try to prove your point. Now, of course, it's an opinion, so sometimes, you're not always, most of the time, you're not going to be able to prove your opinion, but you can definitely back it up. All right. We covered this a minute ago, but thinking of the theme of it, so, what are you focusing on? Is it a person, a place, an issue, an incident? Something that you're really honing in on for your op-ed. Is it big? Is it overarching in the column? The theme is big and overarching. So what's the main point that you're writing about, and why is it important? Here's a big piece. The theme has to appear early on when it is, early on in the story. And they also are going to tell you right here, or also serve as a turning point on a deeper level argument. But especially when you're at that, this is hard to do. This takes a little bit of, practice, like a little bit of experience. For you guys right now starting off, I want you to focus this off. The theme should appear in the piece early on. So and you're going to see when I give you your op-ed assignment, within the first few paragraphs, I should know what this is about. Do not wait to get to the middle or near the end, because if you wait to get to the middle or near the end, you're going to lose people's attention, or they're not going to really know what you're talking about. It's going to be, people have short attention spans. They need to kind of at least know early on what this is about. Otherwise, you're going to lose them. So within the first few paragraphs, we should know what it is you're trying to do. Here's another piece. I won't go over all this, but you have to research. You have to back up your arguments with research. So you might just think you know something, right? And maybe you're correct. Find me some research that supports that. So if you say something like, you're talking about how all young people are on social media, or a lot of young people are on social media. Yeah, you're right. I know that. I know that because I know the research, but you're probably right. Now go find me some hard facts and stats that show that. Surveys that have been done, polls that have been done, academic research, right? That shows how many young people are using it. Back up whatever you're saying with research. This is a key part. You need to have research. Anytime you have something that you're asserting, that you're really kind of trying to make a point and persuade, have some kind of research to back it up. It's just going to make your argument stronger. It's just going to make your argument stronger, right? And then here's the last part. I won't go. Oh, there's a couple, but openings and endings. I won't go too much into this because you can read it, and I think they do a good job with it. But think about how you open and how you close. Most people are pretty good with the openings, right? I think just even from taking this class and you've read enough stories that you know maybe kind of how to open the piece. It's the closing that's usually tough. So try to work on that. So for example, for closing, echoes and answers the introduction. What that means is try to almost make it go full circle. So if you mention something in the beginning, maybe you kind of reference it as that last paragraph. Has the last and often most memorable detail, sometimes like a good quote, if you found a quote from some of your research, or you have a good one good line that you think is very powerful, maybe you end with that, right? So just, I want you to focus on, the opening is important, but also with the ending, don't just let it kind of fade off. End with a nice, strong note. End with something powerful. It's hard to do, but that's, I'm going to let you guys experiment and play around with this. Voice, we already talked about, but this expands it a little bit more. So go into voice, make sure you have a voice. And then if you still want to know a little bit more about op-eds, there's a bunch of great articles down here. I really recommend that you go through these. Our assignment is going to be based off of the lessons in this article, but all these here expand on some of these points. And if this is something that you're interested in doing, I want you to, to expand a little bit more, and it'll just make your op-ed better even for this class. Something else just to kind of keep in mind is, remember I said anybody can submit op-eds. So if you do have an opinion, maybe it's something you write for this class and then you want to use that, or you have another idea, you can search, submit op-ed for Hartford Current. It'll bring you on Google. It'll bring you to a link that shows you how you submit it, and you literally kind of just attach your Word document and you give it to them, and there's a possibility that they run it. They might not. Most of the times you don't get something published because it's very competitive, but every once in a while you would get in. So you can. I say this because I want you guys to know that you have this power. We all have this power to submit into these news publications. Even the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, they're extremely competitive, but you do have the at least opportunity, and people do get picked. So yours might be one of the ones that get picked. So op-eds are always something for you just to consider, is to get your voice out there and to have reach the audience of someone like a Hartford Current or one of your local papers, or even like I was saying, if you hit the big time, a New York Times. Okay, so read that article again, though, and especially now that we've gone through the video, and hopefully it will make even more sense as you read through. After you've done that, what I'd like you to do is, here's the Hartford Current opinion page of their digital side, but a lot of these appear in the print paper too. And I want you to read a few and start to see the lessons that we've been talking about, see how they connect. They're not always all going to connect, because a lot of times op-eds, they're written by anybody, so op-eds might not, somebody might not do it as well as like you're learning in this class, because they might have never even had a journalism class. They just want to try to write an op-ed, and the newspaper will edit a little bit, but they usually let you kind of go without as much of a structure. So you might not see the best examples, but you're going to see a lot of what we're learning in class being connected here. And so when you're looking at this, I'm trying to go down here. Anytime you see something that says, let's take a look here, by a person's name, why millennials must make our votes count. This is an op-ed. Someone submitted this to the Hartford Current. They thought it was what they want. The Current said, yep, this is something that we could publish, and they published it, right? And you see it's by a person, by just a regular person here. So whenever you see op-eds, that's being submitted by somebody, from the public. When you see ones that say editorials, if you remember, that comes from the newspaper. So let's click on that for a second. Let it load. So these are all editorials from the newspaper. These are all stances the Hartford Courant took. Editorial: the Courant endorses Oz Riebel for governor. So there, as you know, there's a gubernatorial race here in Connecticut, and the Hartford Courant's editorial board, right? So their editorial writers, from the Courant's perspective, said, we believe this is the best candidate, and then they explain to you why. So all these are stances of the newspaper. Okay, so when you see editorial, that's what that means. When you see op-ed, that comes from regular people, and when you see opinion, that comes from certain writers from the Hartford Courant. They have columns, is what they call them, right? So these are hired people from the Courant. These are, journalists from the Courant that are paid, though, to have an opinion. So unlike the hard news stories or the feature stories, they're not necessarily going out and doing reporting. They're writing an opinion piece. They're writing op-eds pretty much for a living. That's what their profession is for the Hartford Courant. And that's their pieces. So these are Hartford Courant staff members with an actual individual opinion. Editorials come from the whole newspaper, the opinion of the newspaper as a whole. Op-eds come from your regular people. So go ahead and read a few of them. See what the difference is. Read an editorial, read an op-ed, read an opinion piece, and you'll get a good idea of how they're all, they're similar, but what the differences are. All right, and after you've done all this, you'll be able to start working on your assignment, which is an op-ed. So you're going to write an op-ed on any topic. I'm giving you any topic that you want to write on. You get to choose something that's important to you. You're going to write an op-ed. It's between 750 and 800 words. So all this down here is what I'm not going to go too much into it because it's what we just went over. It's based on that article that I have for you about op-eds and the video that, this video. So between 750 and 800 words, have a clearly defined point. And I also, like I was saying before, want it within the first couple of paragraphs, and also a clearly defined point of view within the first couple of paragraphs. So within 2-3 paragraphs, I should know, what is this honing in on? What is this specifically about? And what's your stance on that? What's your opinion? What are you trying to persuade me with? And that kind of goes into this. Trying to attempt to influence the reader. That means you're trying to persuade me. You're trying to get me to agree with you or to do something, right? So if you're saying, I believe that Oz Riebel should be governor for Connecticut, persuade me. Why should I go vote for Oz Riebel? If you're telling me we should all become vegetarians, persuade me. Why should I be a vegetarian? That's really what the op-ed is doing. You're giving an opinion and you're trying to persuade the person. Represents clarity of thinking. I already went over that, but it should be structured to this. It's not just a tangent. It should kind of connect. It's a story you're giving out. Have a strong, distinctive voice. We already went over that, but are you doing this with urgency? Are you having a little sarcasm in there? Are you being hopeful? Are you, what kind of voice are you using? Evidence of research. I got to see that you had research and you're backing up your facts. If you have a really well-written opinion piece, you do all this other stuff, but there's no evidence of research, you're not showing me where you're getting some of your facts from, or you're not supporting your argument with facts, you're not getting an A. Like, that's automatically knocks you out of the A range, because you have to have evidence of research to show me that you have something to stand on your argument. So this is very important. Following the other lessons from the reading and from this video. So from the reading, I was talking about like a good opening and closing. Is your theme intertwined? All those other things from that article. I'm kind of looking to see, are you trying to apply those? And you're still going to be following AP style and no spelling and grammar. So you're still using AP style, and that's a part of this grading too. So it's due in 2 weeks. You don't have as long. The other ones you had 3 weeks to do. You're only getting 2 weeks for this because you don't really need that much time. I shouldn't say that. This does take time to do, but you don't need that much time to go out and go interview somebody. You're not going out to interview somebody, right? You can do all this for stuff that you find on your own research, on your own time, on your computer. So you're not having to go out and actually attend an event or wait for an interview. So you can start working on this now. So that's why you're getting 2 weeks instead of 3, because that additional week that you normally would need to maybe go get an interview or go somewhere, you're not going to need. You're just going to have the time to do it here. Still, with that said, this does take time. You're writing it, editing it is all going to take time. So, get working on it now. It's not something I would wait until the day before, because you won't probably get the grade that you were expecting if you try to just rush it through, even though you didn't need to go get an interview. And I do want to kind of back up to, for a second, something I should have mentioned. When I say evidence of research, you don't have to, I'm not telling you to go out and quote anybody. You're not going out and getting an interview, but you can use quotes. So if you read another article and there's a good quote from a scientist, let's say, you can take that quote from the scientist that was in that other article, let's say something in the Hartford Courant, use it, and then attribute it to that it was recorded in the Hartford Courant. So for example, you'll say, yes, climate change is happening at a rapid pace, said Dr. Jess Smith in the Hartford Current, right? In a Hartford Current interview. So you could, as long as you're referencing where you got that quote from, you can use quotes in your op-ed. We should all, vegetarians, are eating meat, not eating meat will add years to your life, it said Dr. Joe Smith in a 2015 New York Times article, right? So you can attribute quotes. So you can use quotes, but it's usually going to be just from other articles that you found, and just make sure you're attributing. All right, swinging back here, due in 2 weeks. You guys know the drill with that, and that's all you. That's the homework that you have this week. So you don't have a quiz, you don't have a writing exercise. It's really getting going with this op-ed. If you want a little tip on time management, this week I would write it, because try to take a few hours throughout the week during the week to start writing it. Next week, come back with fresh eyes and edit it. It's usually the best way to do it. So 1 week, take a look and write it. Next week, come back and edit it, and you'll be able to get this done in 2 weeks, no problem. All right, I think I went over everything. I also wanted just to make, I know I've said this before in videos, but I'll say it again here. AP style guide is over here in Blackboard. So I noticed even with the AP exercise, for those of you that have a lot of mistakes, hopefully you're not just trying to do it off of memory. It's right here. Go back and reference it. So when you're writing your story here, same thing. Pull up your AP style guide here and go through and checklist it. Make sure that you're following AP style. All right, I know there was a lot in this video, but if you have any questions or something still confusing with op-eds, as always, message me with specifics. I'd be happy to help you out. But usually if students find op-eds fun, because it's different from the other journalistic writing. You can use your opinion. You have an opinion. You're writing first person. It's a little bit different than the hard news and feature stories that we've been doing. So in this one, think of it as, I don't want to say creative writing, because you're still using research and facts, but you have a little bit more freedom to be creative, and you have a little bit more freedom to let your voice and style come out. So have some fun with this. I look forward to reading them, and I'll get those profiles created for you shortly.